On November 14th, 2025, I watched a former sheriff kneel on a church basement floor and tighten the loose leg on a folding table, while an 11-year-old boy held the wrench steady for him. Behind them was a paper sign with one dead deputy's name written across the top in blue marker. To tell it honestly, I have to trace two rivers. The sorrow current began first, and it began hard. The grace current came later, through a door nobody in that room had a right to expect. By the time I had to speak my ruling, both were running through me at once, and I could not pretend I only felt one of them. The sorrow current began on March 22, 2024 at 8:13 in the morning on the second floor of the Cedar County Sheriff's Administration Building in Mason Falls. That was when Sheriff Daniel Mercer walked into the finance office and told county bookkeeper Tess Nolan to move $18,400 out of the Aaron Cole Memorial Fund and into an emergency payment line he controlled. Aaron Cole had been one of his deputies. Aaron had been dead for 9 months. Tess Nolan said Daniel stood by her desk with both hands flat on the file cabinet and said, "Move it from the Cole Fund. Caleb cannot wait till Monday." She said it was the kind of voice people use when fear has already made the decision and is just trying to catch up to the words. Caleb Mercer was Daniel's 23-year-old son. He had overdosed 2 nights earlier, survived, and needed an inpatient bed by noon. That was the beginning. Not a gunshot, not a chase, not broken glass. A transfer line on a screen. Money raised at a deputy's funeral, moved out of a widow's reach and into a father's panic. The law knows how to name theft. It takes longer to name what kind of theft it was when grief was on both sides of it. When Emily Cole first entered my courtroom, she did not look like a person who wanted to be seen. She looked like a person who had taught herself how to remain standing in public. She carried a manila folder against her ribs as if it had some heat in it. Her left hand stayed on her son Micah's shoulder the whole walk to counsel table, not pressing him down, just keeping contact. What told me who she was choosing to be in that room came later, during a recess, when Daniel Mercer's mother struggled to lower herself into a back row seat. Emily saw it before anyone else did. She reached back, pulled the chair out 2 inches, and then returned to her own place without looking for thanks. I felt the loss she carried, and I saw the kind of person who was carrying it. I want to ask you something before I keep going. Have you ever been in a room where somebody had every right to become smaller, colder, and less generous, and instead they stayed fully themselves? Subscribe. Because that choice matters in this story, and I want you with me when it changes the shape of what came next. The file crossed my desk in a blue banker's box, a slim envelope, and a conflict motion. That motion mattered. Most people do not know this, but when the defendant is the sitting sheriff, half the system has to step back before the case can even breathe. The local prosecutor recused. Local deputies could not do courtroom security. I signed orders bringing in a special prosecutor from Harron County and state troopers for the hallway. When I first opened the box, the top sheet was not a dramatic exhibit. It was the trust ledger for the memorial fund, 4 clean lines, deposits from the funeral, a transfer out, a false code entered over it, then a partial return 6 days later from the sale of Daniel Mercer's bass boat. Even before I read anything else, both rivers were already there. Something had been taken, something had been tried, too late and still real, in answer to what had been taken. From the bench, I saw Emily and Micah enter before every hearing began. There is a view from up there that no camera quite catches. I could see what people looked at before they remembered themselves. Deputies in uniform kept their eyes off Emily until she sat down. Then, one by one, they looked, not long. Just enough to say to themselves that Aaron Cole's family was still here and had to be faced. Daniel Mercer came in through the side door in the same dark suit each time. He had been sheriff for 11 years, and his body still moved like a man expecting doors to open for him. But there was one thing I saw from the bench that made the whole picture different. Every time he reached his chair, his fingers stopped for half a second over the badge still clipped inside his jacket pocket, not touching it, just finding the place where it used to explain him. The first time I really saw his humanity apart from the charge, it had nothing to do with the money. It happened when his son Caleb came in late on the second day and sat down in the last row, thin as fence wire, hands inside his sleeves. Daniel did not turn around. He did not even look. but his whole face changed in the space between one breath and the next. I saw a father trying not to reach for his child in the one room where he had to answer for what he had done because of him. Seeing that did not lighten the theft. It required me to see both. If you are still with me, you have probably gone quiet. Whatever was around you when this started has probably fallen back a little. Subscribe. That kind of attention deserves the rest of this story. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The sorrow current moved first through evidence. Its source was that 813 transfer, but its path ran through what that transfer did after it happened. The first piece of evidence that made me stop was Exhibit 6, a printed email from Emily Cole to the county treasurer sent that same afternoon at 2:41. She was asking why the counseling reimbursement for Micah had been denied from the memorial account. There was nothing dramatic in the wording. That was the point. She wrote, "I just need to know if the account is frozen because his school asked whether we are continuing therapy and I told them yes." I read that once, then again, and then I put it down. The money was not abstract anymore. It was a child's next appointment after his father's death. The sorrow current kept widening. Aaron Cole had been killed on June 11, 2023, while pulling a driver out of a burning pickup on Route 9. The fund in his name had been built from casseroles, church envelopes, softball raffles, and the folded bills people pass hand to hand when somebody in a county dies before the family is ready for it. By the time Daniel Mercer touched it, that money had already been blessed by ordinary people. Emily's victim statement belonged to the sorrow current. She said, "My son asked me if his father's name could run out like gas." She said it with both hands folded, and she did not raise her voice even once. I wrote that sentence in the margin of my notes, and for the rest of the hearing I could feel its weight sitting there. Between those pieces of evidence, I watched Micah Cole do one thing that told me how children survive rooms like that. Every time somebody said his father's name, he pressed his thumbnail into the cardboard edge of the folder in his lap, not hard enough to bend it, just enough to have something solid answer back. From the bench, that was louder than tears would have been. The grace current began with Exhibit 11, which was a receipt, not a speech, not a plea. A receipt from Mason Marine and Storage showing Daniel Mercer had sold his base boat on March 28, 2024 for $9,500, and every cent of it had gone back into the memorial account before any criminal charge had yet been filed. It did not undo the theft. It did tell me he had stopped lying before the system forced every inch of truth out of him. Then came the testimony of Pastor Lionel Reese, who had gone with Daniel to the treatment center in Bell City the day Caleb was admitted. Pastor Reese said Daniel told the intake clerk, "Use my name on every paper. Do not hide me behind my office." That belonged to the grace current, not because it erased what he did, because truth had started entering him before the courtroom ever did. The grace current kept moving when the defense entered evidence from Caleb Mercer's treatment records, with private details sealed and only dates shown. I permitted a limited use of them because motive was not guilt, but it was part of sentence. The dates showed Caleb had been admitted on March 22nd and had stayed 91 days. Daniel had not stolen to buy comfort. He had stolen because he was terrified his son would die if he waited one more weekend. I know what some people think when they hear that. They think explanation is an attempt to bargain with harm. It is not. A courtroom does not become more honest by knowing less. My job was not to protect myself from the whole picture. My job was to hold it still long enough to respond to it fairly. The two rivers met for the first time during Caleb Mercer's testimony. He was pale, sober, and trying very hard not to protect his father in a way that would stain the truth. He said, "My father broke the law for me, and I still need him to tell the truth." I wrote that down too. There was the harm, there was the human bond. Both were standing in the same sentence. Here is what I am offering. The rest of this story, told the same way I have been telling it, with nothing cleaned up before it earns its place. Subscribe if that is what you want. I will keep going. The defense did what defense is supposed to do. It asked me to see the whole person and not just the crime. Daniel Mercer had no prior criminal history. He had spent 11 years in office and 29 years in law enforcement. He had sold property, repaid the full $18,400 before indictment, resigned from the county pension board, and entered a guilty plea to official misconduct, theft, and falsifying a public record without forcing Emily Cole through a full trial. But the defense surprised me in one place, and not because of strategy. Daniel's lawyer, Miriam Sloan, said, "If you decide he should never wear a badge again, I understand. I am only asking that you do not decide he can never be of use again." That sentence belonged to the grace current. It did not ask me to forget. It asked whether usefulness could still be built out of disgrace. Still, there was something the defense could not resolve, no matter how carefully it spoke. The sorrow current contained a truth argument alone could not lift. Aaron Cole died serving the same office Daniel Mercer used as cover when he entered that false code. A widow had to learn from a bounced reimbursement that the sheriff had borrowed against her dead husband's name. No lawyer's phrasing could make that smaller, and none should have tried. Then Daniel Mercer took the stand. Most viewers do not know this word, but before sentence I am required to give a defendant allocution. That is simply the law's way of saying, before I tell you what the state will do to you, I must let you tell me who you are in this moment. Some people use it to deny. Some use it to bargain. Some finally tell the truth there because there is nowhere else left to stand. He said 3 things I have not forgotten. The first belonged to the sorrow current. He said, "I told myself I was borrowing from the dead because the living could not wait." He said it flat, like a man who had stopped asking his own words to protect him. It did not help him, it helped the truth. The second belonged to the grace current. He said, "Do not spare me in a way that teaches my son nothing." That was not a polished line. It came out rough and almost too low to hear. But from the bench I heard it, and I knew he meant it. The third is the one I wrote down and looked at for a long time. He said, "I took money that was not mine because I thought one more lie could buy my son one more day." I wrote it down. I looked at it for a long time. Both things I was feeling were in that one sentence. I did not expect that. As I listened to him, a memory from my own life came back with such force that I had to set my pen down. I was 19. My older brother had been dead for 2 days. In the back room of a funeral home, my mother and I were opening condolence cards and laying bills into little stacks on a coffee table with a burn mark on one corner. A farmer from 3 roads over had put $40 in an envelope and written, "For gas and sandwiches." My mother held that money for a second, then took $10 from the stack and slid it back into the envelope because she knew his wife had been sick all winter and they needed groceries. I remember the smell of coffee, lilies, and wet wool coats. I remember grief sitting in the room. I remember Grace sitting down beside it. I will never forget either one. I just realized, saying that out loud, that I had never actually put that memory into words in any courtroom context before. Subscribe. That is going to matter more in a few minutes. Subscribe now. After that, the convergence point became clear to me. The sorrow current had a source, which was the theft from Aaron Cole's memorial fund on March 22, 2024. Its path ran through Emily's denied therapy reimbursement, Micah's question about his father's name, and every ledger line that proved trust had been used like spare cash. The grace current had a source too. It began with the money Daniel returned before charge, and with the truth he slowly stopped resisting once fear stopped doing all the talking. Its path ran through Caleb's treatment, Pastor Reese's testimony, Miriam Sloan's strange, honest defense, and Daniel's own refusal to ask me for soft mercy. The rivers converged in Caleb's sentence and in Daniel's allocution. At that point, I could no longer treat the case as a simple choice between punishment and pity. It had become a question of whether justice could tell the whole truth without tearing it in half. I felt anger and mercy at the same time, and I did not know where to set either one down. The day of sentencing, the room was full but not restless. That is one thing I remember. Nobody was whispering. Even the benches sounded careful when people shifted. Emily sat with Micah on her right and Aaron's sister Lena on her left. Daniel sat alone at defense table for the first 3 minutes because his lawyer was in the hallway speaking with the clerk. He kept his hands folded so tightly I could see the skin blanch from the bench. I had decided carefully. I had decided knowing that this ruling had to hold the weight of what was lost and also leave room for what might still happen. Those two things do not always fit in the same ruling. In this case, they did. I had made sure they did. Before I announced sentence, I looked at Daniel Mercer and said one thing I had not planned to ask until that exact moment. I said, "Sheriff Mercer, if a deputy did what you did and then asked this county to keep trusting his badge because his reasons were painful, would you let him wear that badge one more day?" The room did not move. He looked at me for a long second. Then he reached inside his jacket, took out the badge, laid it on the defense table, and said, "No, Your Honor." He turned to the clerk and asked for paper. By the time his lawyer sat back down, he was writing his resignation. I want to stop here for just a moment, not for effect, because that sound, the badge touching the wood, is still in me when I think about this case. Subscribe while I take that second. Subscribe and stay. Okay, let me keep going. Once he had resigned, I gave the sentence the way I had written it. I said, "I am ordering you to pay $1,800 in restitution to Emily Cole through the clerk within 30 days, and an additional $12,000 to the Aaron Cole Memorial Scholarship for first responder families within 1 year. That money was meant to keep a widow and child from carrying grief alone in practical ways. You took that support out of their hands at the moment they were entitled to trust it. Money cannot restore trust by itself, but money must go first toward what it interrupted." I said, "I am also ordering 2 years of supervised probation with 900 hours of restorative service, and every one of those hours will be performed through Cedar House Recovery Transport and the Aaron Cole Youth Safety Program. You used your office to move resources in secret for a child you loved. I am requiring you to move resources in daylight for families who need rides, forms, phone calls, and steady hands. You will be useful in the exact part of the world where you chose secrecy over help." I said, "I am ordering weekly counseling for 18 months with a licensed family trauma and addiction counselor, plus a certified public ethics course and quarterly financial audits filed with this court. The evidence showed me a man who knew how to command, conceal, and decide under fear, but did not know how to ask for help before fear became action. I am not sentencing only what you did. I am sentencing the pattern in you that made it possible." I said, "And there is one more thing. On the first Monday of every month for 18 months, you will sit before a restorative accountability panel made up of one retired deputy, one recovery counselor, one community pastor, and if she chooses to attend or send a statement, Emily Cole or her designee. You will answer questions about your service hours, your counseling attendance, your employment, and the truthfulness of your conduct since this day. Accountability is not isolation. It is being made answerable in the company of other people." Then I gave him the condition for early completion. I said, "If at the 12-month mark every dollar has been paid, at least 600 service hours have been completed, every counseling session has been attended, and there has not been one false statement to this court or your supervisors, I will consider ending the remaining supervision early. That condition exists for one reason. Compliance is not just obedience. It is proof, over time, that the truth has become your habit." After I imposed sentence, I spoke to him directly, and I remember those words almost exactly because I meant every one of them. I said, "You took money from a fund tied to Deputy Aaron Cole's death, and what that cost was not only dollars. It cost a widow a measure of peace. It cost a child a clean sense that his father's name would be kept safe by the office his father served." I said Emily Cole and Micah Cole should never have had to learn from a bounced reimbursement that grief can be mishandled by the very people who stood beside them at the funeral. I said, "And you, Daniel Mercer, are not only the worst act you committed in fear, though you are fully responsible for it. The charges describe your conduct. They do not exhaust your humanity. That is why I am requiring you to live in a way that answers what you broke." I said, "To everyone in this room, do not insult this moment by choosing only one truth. Harm was done here. Human need was also present here. If we tell only one of those truths, then all we are doing is selecting the version that asks less of us." Then I ended with a fact. I said, "Trust takes years to build and minutes to spend. You just heard what I said to him in that courtroom. I want you to hold that. Subscribe before we go further, because what happened after I said it is the part of this case I have thought about the most. Subscribe now. When the courtroom began to empty, I stayed seated, as I always do, until the rail had cleared. From the bench, I watched Daniel sign the resignation paper, slide it to the clerk, and then sit back down with both hands open on the table as if he had finally run out of things to hold. Emily did not go to him. She did not owe him that. The person I kept watching was Daniel's son, Caleb. He stood in the back row for almost a minute before walking down the aisle. He stopped beside Emily, not close enough to crowd her, and said, "I will not waste what he did wrong for me." She looked at him, nodded once, and that was all. It was enough. Before I stood up, I placed my palm flat against the bench and left it there for one full breath. I do not know how to explain why I did that without making it smaller. It was wood, weight, stillness, and the need to feel something solid under me before I stepped back into the hallway. What happened after is the part people ask me about most. On November 14th, 2025, at the Fellowship Hall of New Hope Baptist Church, the Aaron Cole Wintercoat Drive was setting up for the first cold snap of the year. I was there because the scholarship board invited me to see how the fund had grown. Daniel Mercer was there too, by court order, on service hours. He was on one knee, tightening a table leg with a wrench, while Micah Cole held the other side steady. Behind them hung that sign with Aaron's name on it. Nothing about that scene erased March 22nd, 2024. Emily was still a widow. Micah still had a dead father. Daniel was still the man who took from that fund. But there they were, in the same room, under Aaron's name, doing a small, useful thing without spectacle. I did not tell anybody what to feel when I saw it. I just stood there and let the fact of it be true. There was an appeal. Daniel Mercer appealed to the State Court of Appeals, and on February 12, 2026, that court left every part of my sentence in place. In plain language, they said the sentence fit both the crime and the record that explained how this crime happened. It took 7 months and 22 days from the filing of the notice of appeal to the ruling. When I read it, I did not feel victory. I felt steadiness. What this case showed me is something I am still working out. Holding two feelings at once is not confusion. Sometimes it is the only honest form of sight. I have seen many people in my courtroom ask for mercy when what they really wanted was distance from consequence. I have also seen people accept consequence so fully that mercy had somewhere real to land. This case made that difference plain to me in a way no other case had. I have never said this in any other professional setting, but there are moments on the bench when being fully human hurts more than being decisive. This was one of them. I do not regret that hurt. I think it kept me from lying to myself about what justice required. I have seen this pattern before in other forms. A daughter cleaning out the apartment of the father who failed her. A man paying support after years of absence and doing it quietly, on time, because apology had to become calendar first. A widow who did not want revenge mistaken for repair. The law gives names to acts. Life keeps giving names to what survives them. If you are somebody who knows the sorrow current in this story from the inside, if you recognize something in Emily Cole's face, then I want to say only what I believe I earned the right to say. I saw that look. It was not weakness. It was the effort of a person trying not to let injury decide the last shape of their soul. Over the course of those proceedings, the sorrow in Emily never disappeared, but it never emptied her of herself either. And if you are somebody who knows the defendant's chair better than you wish you did, if you made a choice under fear and now live inside the cost of it, I will tell you what I have observed over years of watching people split in two directions after they cause harm. The ones who move toward something do not begin with self-forgiveness. They begin with accuracy. They stop editing the truth to protect the part of themselves they miss. What I wish I could say to every person who sat where Daniel Mercer sat is simple. Your future will not be built by explaining less. It will be built by lying less. I think again about that church basement, a folding table, a loose leg, an old wrench, a boy steadying one end while a disgraced man fixed the other under the name of the deputy whose family he had betrayed. That is why I told you this story. Subscribe and stay. If you leave something in the comments, leave the kind of truth that can hold grief and grace in the same hand.